Alexander the Great and the Business of War, Part 2. As Persepolis had exceeded all other cities in prosperity, so in the same measure it now exceeded all others in misery. Diodorus Siculus. Miseries along with poverty for the people who were raped of their land and their self. However, with such great turmoil came lasting hope that those affected would be redeemed. If Alexander felt that unity was close, the inhabitants of the Iranian plateau would not forget the sacking of Persepolis among other distasteful actions before and after. However, much in the accounts of the sacking and destruction of Persepolis by Alexander may have been an exaggeration. But then again, much of it could very well be true, as this was a war of revenge to some extent, due to the Persians supposedly burning down Greek temples during the Greco-Persian War. Sacrifices to the gods and cultural unity. I only say supposedly because the Persians were very respectful of other cultures' religions. Xerxes himself, during the Greco-Persian War, was accompanied by not only magi, but also by Greek diviners and specialists. Xerxes even sacrificed 1,000 bulls at Leon to the goddess Athena. And speaking of Athena, he ordered the Greek exiles to make sacrifices to Athena at the Acropolis. However, this could have been due to Xerxes making alms to his own gods as well as theirs as a sign of respect and sorrow for the burning of Acropolis, but this still does not answer whether the burning did or did not happen. Now, this is just a small showing of Xerxes' respect towards other cultural beliefs, but it should not go unnoticed, for it does provide a glimpse into the events in Greece during the war. The Persian invasion did leave death, destruction, looting for that is obvious with all nations in war, but one has to be careful suggesting that it was Xerxes' intent to take direct aim at holy temples with few sources provided without considering the nature of the Persian respect towards other gods as demonstrated by Xerxes. On the other hand, we have Alexander who invaded under the pretense of a just cause or just war to avenge the Greeks for Persian wrongs. However, if your intention is to invade and conquer to bring about social harmony through cultural unity, burning down the Persian house is not a great start towards promoting peace. This harmony never materialized, not even during the Seleucid Empire, which controlled most of the former lands of the Persian Empire. Even though with many Greek colonists settling in the former lands of the once mighty Achaemenid Empire, they truly never penetrated or absolutely influencing the peoples of the Iranian plateau with their Hellenistic culture. In time, the Greek settlements, basically they look more like spread out islands. They're too far from one another to make a true cultural impact in the regions they settled. Many of the tribal societies in Iran and further to the east held on to their traditional ways and looked at the Greeks settling in their areas as unwanted guests or, in the modern sense, illegal aliens. This demonstrates that Alexander the Great's grand strategy of united racial harmony through Hellenism was not even in the best interest of his successors to his eastern lands, Seleucus, or with the Greeks settling within the eastern lands. Because of this alienation imposed upon the indigenous people of the Iranian plateau, rebellion would soon rise out of this and attack the very masters who preached harmony. Alexander the Not-So-Great? The notion of Alexander being great is indeed a mistake written by those who romanticized the idea later on, which in turn created an argument based on Western ethnocentrism that continues. If there is anything great that can be said about Alexander, it surely was not his foreign or domestic policy, but rather his ability to innovate on the battlefield, which was in itself a marvel. However, the question remains, why did he invade Persia? The Lucrative Adventure. So why did Alexander invade the Persian Empire? If you said it was in revenge against the Persians, you're right, but there is another reason, and that was money. Alexander invaded Persia not only to get some payback, but also he needed the money, and Persia had vast amounts of wealth that could whet his appetite and pay for his armies and debts. The looting began once he was on the move. At Babylon, the amount Alexander confiscated is unknown, but given that it was Babylon, One can assume the amount plundered was indeed great. When he took Susa, he acquired 50,000 talents, Persepolis 120,000, Pasargadae 6,000, Ecbatana 26,000. From these cities alone, 202,000 talents, excluding Babylonia, of gold and silver were now in his hands. From the amount of money taken, Alexander handed out bonuses to his men totaling 12,000 talents, with another 2,000 going to Thessalian soldiers. Moreover, many of Alexander's men, including Alexander himself, likely came across gold and silver coins that the Persians had looted from the Greek treasuries during the Greco-Persian Wars. Understand that the amount of money mentioned only pertains to the areas of western Iran and portions of Mesopotamia. Moreover, consider the amount of wealth his soldiers looted during the campaign, as many loose coins would have been everywhere. When considering the remainder of his conquest, Alexander may have looted 400,000 talents before he died. To give you some estimates, 250,000 talents looted from Persia, 400,000 talents looted during Alexander's career. A rough valuation of the talents plundered in dollars would come to roughly 7 trillion Persian, and a grand total, including Persia, 11 trillion. When considering the amount taken by his men, the number only increases. Of course, the truth comes out. The Roman historian Arrian tells us that Alexander set out to conquer Persia as an act of revenge for past wrongs. Alexander addresses this in his letter to Darius, stating, quote, "Your ancestors came into Macedonia and the rest of Greece and treated us ill without any previous injury from us. I have been appointed commander-in-chief of the Greek, and wishing to take revenge on the Persians, crossed over into Asia. Hostilities being begun by you." End quote. But was it really all about revenge, or was there something more to it? It is possible that Alexander needed money. Many books discussing Alexander's invasion of Persia tell of revenge as the motivator, of course due to the Greco-Persian Wars of the past. But it is rather odd that Alexander would all of a sudden decide to mount his horse and lead his army into the lands of Persia, even though the war had been over for more than 100 years. However, Arrian provides another passage. Alexander gave a speech at Op in 324 BCE when his men mutinied for a second time, the first being at the Hyphasis River a few years back. Arrian provides an interesting statement as to why Alexander declared war on Persia. Quote, "I inherited from my father a few gold and silver cups, and less than 60 talents in the treasury. Philip had debts mounting to 500 talents, and I raised a loan of a further 800. End quote. Alexander's father, Philip, had already set his eyes on Persia and was preparing an invasion force, but was assassinated before he could carry out his objective. With his death, Alexander was left with a semi-professional army. They were a paid fighting force directly paid by the king himself. In order for Alexander to pay for this army, if he wished to keep it, either he had to disband a portion to save money, which was unacceptable, or go on the march to save his kingdom. It would seem he had little choice but to save his kingdom and pay the bills by conquering and confiscating from the lands of Persia. Death of a man, death of an era. It seems reasonable to assume that Alexander used Persia in order to pay for the troops his father left behind. One might think this would be ludicrous, but why would it? Alexander was given a well-trained and organized fighting force. His youth may have also played a part, as history has often been written by young people willing to take on a challenge of great risk, since the life expectancy during this period was short. Because of this, Alexander felt that Persia was a grand prize if he could take it. Once he took the Persian Empire, the cold, hard reality soon set in, and the new problem was then how to deal with two cultures. How unified were the two cultures after the fall of Persia? In a sense, it makes relatively no sense to say two cultures. However, for clarity, we shall keep it as two cultures. It was really one culture, Hellenism, versus a smorgasbord of various Oriental cultures. Those living on the Iranian plateau did seem to be, for the most part, followers of the Zoroastrian religion. But religion does not indicate ethnic or tribal affiliations and allegiances. Instead, the various tribes that dotted the landscape had many different customs and practices that came with diverse languages. The division of cultures was, in and of itself, a huge obstacle for the Greco-Macedonians. Hellenism would take root and thrive much more in the West, Western Asia, whereas in the East it had little effect. It was present, but not always noticeable. This does not mean that Hellenism in Iran was not present, nor had it any effect on the local population, but rather that it was established, yet minuscule, like the military force assigned to protect the vital trade arteries of the Eastern Empire. The unity quickly ended with Alexander's death. It looked hypocritical of Alexander to promote unity in life. When on death has been asked, quote, "To whom do you leave the kingdom?" He replied, "To the strongest." End quote. This would not have been the case. However, Seleucus and those who ruled after were never able to establish a loyal political base of influential proportions, nor were they capable of centralizing the entire empire effectively, at least not in the East. Furthermore, they never truly penetrated or influenced the indigenous peoples on the Iranian plateau with their Hellenistic culture. Dr. Richard Fry says, quote, "The Seleucids controlled the main trade arteries in Iran, but little else." End quote. This may indicate that Alexander controlled not much more after proclaiming the land as his and moving on. Alexander's dream became a reality that ultimately overtook him in death. Before Alexander died, he was approached concerning who the successor would be. Alexander replied, "To the best man, for I foresee that a great combat of my friends will be my funeral games." End quote. His statement concerning that his empire went to the best man suggests that even he had no confidence in any of his men, and why not? Alexander saw himself to be a god. What mortal among them could be his equal? He knew that none of his men could do what he did, and that is why he foresaw conflict. The empire Alexander left was too complex to be governed by one man. Had he lived to be very old, his empire may have stayed intact, but this is conjecture. He took on the customs of those he conquered to show love and appreciation for all things Eastern, but in reality it was just a political maneuver. Once Alexander died, his Macedonian men divorced Iranian wives. Cassander, the son of Antipater, the general who supported both Philip and Alexander, murdered Alexander's widow Roxana and son Alexander around 310 BCE. And all of the Iranian satraps were removed from power. The Macedonians wanted only revenge and nothing to do with anything Eastern, what was barbaric. However, this did not help, for even the Macedonians fought amongst themselves over the glory and riches Alexander provided, as they did at Persepolis in 330 BCE. Now I understand these two articles were controversial, okay? I understand I may get some flack for this. The articles did get a little bit of flack off and on, though, but it was widely viewed with some skepticism, but also it provided a new alternative. So why did Alexander invade? Of course, it's war, and war is money. It's business. That's the cold hard truth of it all, and people's lives are affected by it. Anyways, if you like this article, give me a thumbs up. Leave your comments below. No fighting. And until next time, see you later.